introduce our special guest.
My pleasure. So, making sure you can hear me, right? I'm not muted with any of my mute buttons. I was trying to cut out the kitty screaming as much as I could. All right.
That's part of the charm.
So our guest, Helen, comes from a diverse background of beliefs. She was raised Roman Catholic, then rejected the church to move into paganism. She was a pagan high priestess for 10 years during her time in that faith, which was 13 years total. Eventually, realizing through education and skeptical inquiry into herself, she came to the conclusion that she had no solid evidence for her beliefs, which brought her to a more humanistic and realistic worldview. Still studying psychology, even out of college, she spends her time trying to understand human behavior. Good luck with that. The emotional and psychological understandings of ourselves and what forms our perspectives and why. So this is why I went into engineering, because I don't even have to deal with it. On top of, yes, rocket science is a lot easier than understanding human behavior. It is. On top of her volunteer work here at RfR, she is also a volunteer at the Atheist Community of Austin, an advocate of LGBTQIA plus rights, and a co-host of the podcast Left of the Valley. For fun, she enjoys horror, especially cosmic horror, and sci-fi movies. So Alien must be right up in there. Combines both video gaming and diving deep into made-up world-building stories such as the LOR, Lord of the Rings stories. You can read more about Helen's journey in the online article, Selling the Paranormal, A Peek into the Spirit University, and we're going to put that in the chat. But if you're just listening to this, you can Google it. And that's the article I interviewed Helen for Skeptical Inquirer, and it's quite a fascinating peek. I knew a lot about Helen's background, but I learned a lot more when I interviewed her for that. So without any further ado, welcome, Helen.
Hey, Helen. Welcome back to the show.
It helps if I unmute myself to use my words.
It does.
It does really help.
People can hear you.
So yes. I am so excited to do this talk, especially because this topic is particularly very personal to me, because for me, when I was going through my deconstruction and deconversion, letting go of a belief in God was the easy part, and rejecting religious structures, the magical thinking, was the harder part to let go of. So I really wanted to have this discussion because I'm sure many people are on similar journeys or have, experienced this to a certain degree, one way or the other. So first, I'd like to start off in defining magical thinking or superstitious thinking is the belief that unrelated events are casually connected despite the absence of any possible causal link between them, particularly as a result of supernatural effects. Examples include the idea that personal thoughts can influence the external world without acting on them, or that objects must be casually connected if they resemble each other or have come into contact with each other in the past. Magical thinking is a type of fallacious thinking and is a common source of invalid causal inferences. Unlike confusion of correlation with causation, magical thinking does not require the events to be correlated. So usually this starts developing with young children with a belief in Santa Claus, for example, or children will believe things were created for a purpose. So for example, if you ask a young child, did rocks naturally form a certain way, or were the rocks formed because animals like to scratch themselves and feel better on the rocks? A young child will respond that the rocks were created to help the animal. So they will naturally put those two things together because in their own observation of the world, everything has a purpose, and that usually comes down to safety and security with their caregivers, because they like that recognition of, okay, this thing happens, so this thing happens, and they start following that pattern because it makes us feel safe. It gives us an understanding of how the world works, and it keeps young children from experiencing any anxiety when things are random.
Oh, so this is kind of like how something that I'm probably jumping ahead here too, but I know a lot of adults do this too, right? Where you think, oh, well, these two things are correlated, so one must have caused the other, right?
Yes. And this is where it forms. We start seeing magical thinking as children as young as like 3-4 years old. Yeah, it starts that young. If you have a conversation with a 3 to 4-year-old and ask them these types of questions, they nearly all the time will answer, this thing happened because it helps this thing or connected to this thing. So it's just the way their brain works in trying to figure out the world. But especially for us who grew up in religious structures or believe in the supernatural or superstition, that development of those ideas will move into our adolescence, into adulthood. So for example, after this, we will start to put correlations together that do not exist. For example, if you ever did prayer and you prayed for a job or, for something to go your way, and you will associate the thing going your way with the prayer. So that is a form of magical thinking. And it's not at a fault of yourself, because this is something that religions teach you, because they enforce that magical thinking into adolescent and the adult brain. And especially when it starts forming in young children, unless someone teaches them, they don't have the perspective as they grow older to start putting those things apart and questioning things. They will just take it as, this is a given, so, and those of you that have grown up in religious structures definitely, I'm sure, have realized this.
Yeah, that really makes me think, I'm thinking back to what we were taught in church, and it's almost like it's very carefully built into the teaching. I remember always learning just these simple phrases, like people would say, well, everything happens for a reason,
right.
Which is essentially training you to make this mistake that you just described, right? To assume that things are related when they may actually not have anything to do with each other.
Right. And you have to understand that, though, this helps us make sense of the world. If you don't have a skeptical, science-based way of looking at the world, you're going to want to think that the world must have a purpose. Why do we have evil? Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do good things happen to bad people? And all these different things. And when you're brought up in these religious structures, they give you this comfort that there must be some form of ultimate justice or an ultimate plan, because it makes us feel stable as we move forward into our lives. But as we know, the world is very chaotic. And when you have like an existentialist view, like I do, an absurdist view, the universe doesn't care about me, doesn't care about you, doesn't care if I took a poop this morning, doesn't care if I helped an old lady across the street, does not care. So because of that, the existentialist view can be terrifying. And it's much easier to move back into these magical thinking patterns because they give us a sense of comfort and things are connected. So for example, like, have you ever had the phone ring and the person you were thinking about is on the other line? And so you will associate that you had like this little psychic impression that you were meant to talk to this person because you were thinking about them. If you are a person that will ask you, if you, for example, wear your lucky socks, and when you wear your lucky socks, you perform better at work. Or you perform better on a project that you're working on for work or for school or something like that. Now, it has nothing to do with the socks, obviously, because it's just cloth and socks are socks, but you will put those correlations together and it will cause a psychological confidence boost, or it will cause a psychological association with the repeated pattern. So we tend to put these patterns together, and we all do this. Like we were talking before the chat, I am a person that when I park my car and I find a closed parking space, I will say I have good parking karma. I know it's magical thinking, but I say it because it's just a ritual that I do, and it gives me some kind of feeling of control in this chaotic universe, even though logically I know it's all BS. And you have to, and also too, like, there's nothing correlated between me getting a good parking spot and me saying that I have good parking karma. It's just luck. So there's nothing to associate the two, but we tend to want to put these associations together because it gives us more of an understanding how the world works. And it makes us feel like there's somebody looking out for us to a certain degree. Because like I said, it's very chaotic, and coming to the realization that the universe doesn't give a crap about you can be very difficult for people to realize. And the magical thinking helps us have that sort of comfort with that.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it. I mean, isn't the main point of magical thinking sometimes to give yourself a sense of control over things that you otherwise would not have any control over?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
That feels comfortable. I would like to think that I could, make my missing car keys appear if I said the right phrase.
I would really love that if that would work, but like it does seem that God really cares about missing car keys and missing things, because those are the things he tends to bring miracles for. Childhood bone cancer, not so much, but he'll help you find your car keys. So
Weird priorities.
yeah, I know. It's this is kind of weird, isn't it? So we tend, as we move forward into adulthood, we will do these rituals like the one that I just described. People will knock on wood, and say like, oh, I hope this and this happen, knock on wood. We naturally do these things because they're nomenclature, it's part of our culture. But that is a form of magical thinking, because you can knock on the wood all you want. It's not going to make something good happen, but that is that superstitious thinking we tend to develop as we get older. Lucky rabbit's foots, throwing salt over our shoulder, to I think it's for cursing or not getting cursed. I don't remember what the nomenclature for that is, but these are all things that we engage within our culture that is magical thinking and superstitious thinking. And if you don't examine it for what it is, you will just say like, oh, well, it's culture, but it must have some kind of meaning because everybody does it.
Yeah,
It
so
must work.
a friend of mine who's a skeptic and a writer too, he wrote a pair of articles. I'm going to put the second one in the chat, which has a link to the first one.
Mhm.
He actually interviewed well-known published skeptics about what superstitions they still have. So it's quite fascinating because these are very skeptical people, and yet you sometimes just hang on to things like a ritualistic thing because it feels good to do it, even if you really know it's not going to help, that kind of a thing. One of them I recall, I don't remember if it was in here or someone told me, they have to touch the outside of an airplane every time they're going off and into the plane, walking off the gate into the plane. And if they don't do that, they feel like there's going to be a disaster. And this is a skeptic.
Well, and we can kind of associate, we see these in things with people like with obsessive compulsion disorder, that they do these rituals to reduce anxiety. So an example of your friend touching the outside of an airplane, that is relieving some kind of anxiety. There's no correlation of the plane suddenly like not going to crash.
After I found out about this, by the way, I've flown since, I don't even look at the outside of the plane, because if I see a rusty spot or something, I will freak out. So I'm going to do the opposite. I'm not going to touch it. I'm not going to even look at the status of what the outside of the plane looks like around the door.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We all do this. We all have certain patterns of magical thinking that we do, and it's just because that has been hardwired into our brain, whether through culture or something we just started doing in childhood. That's why you'll see, people with obsessive compulsive disorder do these rituals, because it is a form of magical thinking, like checking if the stove is turned off over and over again will not, and they associate with that. If they don't do that, they're trying to keep their mom from dying. And if they don't make sure that the stove is off, their mom is going to die. These two things do not correlate with each other, but because it relieves that anxiety of that feeling that they might lose a family member, they do it over and over
I've heard
again.
one thing is repeatedly flipping an on-off switch, a wall switch, for a light fixture or something, on and off, on and off, on and off, because they don't feel they got it right the last time. No, it's still not right. I have to do it again. It's like,
yeah, and this is understandable because we all do this in minor ways. Like one of my best friends, which is something that he had to learn not to do, is that we would be in a restaurant, and if each table, like the salt, pepper, and like, drink menu and like sugar bowl wasn't set up a certain way, he couldn't sit still and enjoy his meal. And
I know people that have that
yeah,
going
he's,
on.
And it's just a minor thing. Like he doesn't have OCD in some sort of extreme, but these are little rituals that he does because it makes him feel safe, and it relieves that feeling of anxiety that we have. Now,
It's
I
something
am
that we
not,
probably all have to some
yeah,
extent.
yeah, we
Just some
all,
people maybe feel it more than others.
There's a Netflix series from South Korea I just finished watching, Extraordinary Attorney Woo, which
mhm.
is all
Yeah.
about a woman very high on the autism spectrum, but also a genius, and she's an attorney. And yeah, I saw the making of this, and they really researched what autistic people tend to do, and there's a lot of OCD behavior and things like that. It's fascinating to watch that.
I just
and
started watching that. I'm excited about it.
and I'm not saying that these things are good or bad. They can be very benign. Like if your lucky socks gives you a boost of confidence to perform better in a job interview, I'm not going to poo-poo on your lucky socks because it's psychological trickery. If you recognize it, but you're just like, you know what, I feel better when I wear my lucky socks when I go to the interview. I'm not going to poo-poo on that. I'm like, wear your lucky socks. It's not hurting anybody. It's fine. Because I do magical thinking rituals. We all do. It's just something we do because it helps us feel we have control over our environment, because the world is crazy and chaotic, and we can do tiny little things, even though they have no correlation. It just makes us feel better about these things. But when we're talking about religion, that's when we get into problems. Because normal everyday rituals of, like, wearing lucky socks, or you have to put your pants on a certain way, or you wear a pair of earrings that make you feel better, it gives you like a boost of confidence because you love them, whatever that is, that helps us relieve the anxiety that we feel from just existing in the world. And again, I'm not going to poo-poo on it, because I want people to feel happy, and I don't want them to have anxiety, because as someone that has generalized anxiety disorder, I know what that's like. So if certain things help relieve that a little bit, I'm not going to poo-poo on it. Just realize that it's just a correlation you're making with your brain to give you a little bit of comfort, and that's okay.
And this is something that even animals do too, right?
Yes, they do.
Yeah. I remember learning this in psychology class in college way, way, way back. But I think they figured it out when they were doing operant conditioning with like B.F. Skinner and all that, and they
Yes,
found that
yeah.
they could get animals to start developing superstitions. Like if they fed them a little bit of food at random intervals, they realized the animals would start assuming that the food was coming in as a result of whatever behavior they had been doing right before it happens. And so they'd have these like chickens in cages that were like spinning around in circles trying to make the food appear because they had for some reason developed this idea. So it's
Yeah,
something that,
and I
like you
think this
said,
is a hard part of our that's in the back of our brain, of just the way that through evolution we have developed, that there is because we are a creature that wants us for the world to make sense, and for the world to make sense, it has to have some kind of meaning behind it. So, and even in our cousins, if there's certain rituals that they develop, it is because to them also the world is random. They don't have the type of thought process that we do in the language to express those things. But we've seen apes, like I talked about this in a previous talk. Well, start worshiping certain trees and bringing stones to them to appease nature to a certain degree, to keep that anxiety down of random things that are happening up around them. That is a form of magical thinking. There's nothing like bringing a rock to a tree is not going to prevent a forest fire. It's just, sorry people, I hate to break it to you, it's not going to happen. but to the ape, to our cousins, it relieves that anxiety, because they do recognize there are things happening around them. There has to be some kind of thing going on behind it. And if I can do this thing, that I feel like I have control, maybe the next time this happens, it won't be so scary, or it's going to happen someplace else, and that sort of thing.
It really makes sense when you see, kind of the way that this happens in other animals too. I feel like it's so interesting to look at that and think, oh, how ridiculous, that's absurd that that ape would think that this would do something. But then here we are, at the same time I'll be in a rush to try and go to work, and I'm in a hurry and I'm forgetting everything, and all of a sudden I'm trying to find my car keys, and literally will for a second lapse into that habit of trying to say a prayer desire to find my car keys. I don't even believe in God. But it's
Right.
a habit that I developed at one point, and it'll suddenly reappear under stress out of nowhere. It's bizarre. And I'm like, I don't even believe that, but I start doing it.
But the pattern comes up because it's
Mhm.
hardwired. I think I really, and there's probably studies on this, and I did put resources in my talk, so you can read those resources. I highly recommend you do to find out more about what I'm talking about, and I'm not just pulling that out of my butt.
I'll drop the links in the chat at the
Yeah,
end.
but there is I think there's a part of our way that we developed as a Homo sapien, and the reason why we have progressed so much is because we had religious thought, because the religious thought helped create our culture, and it helped create order and understanding of the world in the way that we are able to confer and understand it. But now that those superstitions don't need to give us those things that we need, they're kind of going by the wayside with the belief in the supernatural and gods and luck, all these different things. But I don't think it's ever going to completely go away, because of the fact that we have this tendency to want to have control. And even with an atheistic belief or even a skeptic belief, we still engage in these behaviors. I guarantee you there's probably, cradle atheists that engage in some kind of ritual that relieves anxiety for them. It doesn't make any logical sense, but I'm pretty sure they do it because we all do it. And it just gives us that, it reduces the anxiety that we're feeling. And emotions are not rational. Emotions are valid. The thing that you're feeling is completely valid and should not be dismissed, but they're not rational. And overriding that takes the work. And it can be very difficult, especially if you grew up in religious structures that are telling you to pray, to meditate, to focus on the external and just wishing for things to be better, have this sort of like, I believe in magic stuff,
God, how many copies did the book The Secret sell?
Right.
Which, if
And
people
why did that
are
happen?
not familiar with it, it's not religious directly, but it's all about magical thinking, and think about it and it'll happen.
Right. And I talked about this before, and when I did my paganism talk, that it's very easy for people that are moving away from organized religion to fall into these spiritualist woo religions, ways of thinking, because you've deconstructed that the religion is bad. And that's usually a perception of the structure. We can recognize that the majority of the religions in the world have done some terrible things, and we can reject that. We can say, you know what, I don't want to, like, I love the Catholic Church because of the sex abuse scandal. Don't want to be part of that anymore. So I separated from that and went through that deconversion. But I didn't take the time, and I didn't have the education to digest and look at my belief structure. Why do I think the way that I do? Why do I have these superstitious ideas? And that takes more work, because you literally have to rewire your brain. Dr. Ray's talked about this. We've had other people on the show that have talked about this, where it takes the work to look at where your beliefs are coming from and how to break them down. And I am not saying magical thinking is pretty benign and on a small scale. Like I said, like if you're doing like little rituals to reduce a little bit of anxiety, I'm not going to poo-poo on that. But when we're taking it from a religious structure where you have magical thinking, where you think that, somehow, praying to your sky daddy is going to prevent hurricanes, and then and then also it can lead you into taking actions that could be very, very harmful. This is where we get things with the racism and the homophobia and the transphobia and all this type of stuff. This all comes from this magical idea of like boogeymen and people that want to harm us, and people that we start making associations with, because we haven't, the people that haven't digested those things and really looked at it for what it is, start putting those magical thinking ideas together, because they're like, this equals this. It has nothing to do with each other. Like God says that, if a guy likes a penis, somehow that's bad. And then we go to the next extreme, and if that's bad, that means all the queer people are going to take over the world, and the family structure is going to break down, and so on and so on and so forth. The two have nothing to do with each other. So correlation is not causation, because these are two things that cannot be related at all.
And, I love that you use that example because it sounds so hyperbolic and so ridiculous. But we have, in fact, heard that over and over again from well-known religious figures blaming things like hurricanes and terrorist events on gay sex.
Right.
Let's think about that for just a minute.
Just take a breath. Take a step back. And so that's the thing that we have to, even if you have a bad take on something, you have these thoughts that automatically appear into your brain. Take a moment to kind of look at it. Like, is this real? Or is this something that I was taught, or it makes me feel better? Am I putting two things together that aren't related to each other? Because that is going to help you kind of digest things and look at it practically. So there is a test you all can take that I highly recommend.
Oh, I love tests.
Yes. So this test, it's a cognitive reflection test. So I highly recommend everybody take it. Only 33% of people have actually passed this test to show their ability to reflect on their own cognition and how they think about things. So when you got some free time, Cara put it in the chat. I recommend you do this test because it gives you some kind of insight into how you reflect and think about things. They've done this before. They've done other types of studies where for people that are religious, okay, there was a test that was done where participants had to drink a mixture of orange juice and vinegar. I don't know if you saw this test. It's unexplained on Netflix, but it's fascinating because it talks about how magical thinking affects like even our subconscious. So people that were exposed to religious words like divine, inspirational, illuminating, things that had been associated within religious constructs, graceful, these sort of things, and there were benign sentences that were being put forth. They were able to tolerate drinking orange juice and vinegar together as a exercise versus people that didn't have any belief and an ability to have that discipline when they're exposed in the same context. And even though it's subconscious, they're not recognizing the things like divine and graceful and all these certain words. And it doesn't affect the way that they were thinking about things because they have learned discipline through the church. And it built up into that word association, even on a subconscious level, which is a form of magical thinking because words are benign. They only have the meaning that we give to them in the context of how we use language. But if you're like, when someone say something is like, I might use like this chocolate cake tastes divine. I'm having like an otherworldly experience with this chocolate cake. Doesn't mean that the chocolate cake's making me have a spiritual fucking experience, man. But for people that have been associated with religious structures, when you say divine, that means like God is inspiring something for them, that they have been taught that there's this otherworldly thing going on. And that is a problem because this shows that magical thinking affects people even on the subconscious level. These are things people are not even consciously thinking about, which I understand. Jeff, I will find out what episode that was. I will bug the husband because I caught it when he was watching it, but I found this was really fascinating when it came to my talk. I will ask him at the end of the talk what episode it was because it was really, really interesting. I find it really fascinating because like human psychology and the way that we form things is like my jammy jam. And it just peaked. Like with this thing that I'm talking about, like I was like, oh my God, this is a thing. Yeah, we do this. because we all do it. But when we're talking about religious structures, if you are not looking at, and those are for you that are leaving religion or have left, it is, and you are rejecting these teachings that were taught to you, I think that's great. Because what I highly encourage people to do is want to break down the way that they think about things. Why did you have a belief in a God in the first place? What things were taught to you, like associating prayer with good things, bad people getting their comeuppance because God didn't like what they were doing, divine justice, that God will be the one to judge them, when they die, that sort of thing. Where did that come from? And then you have to dissect where your brain is, and if you're still holding on to those ideas. Because if you say, like, karma is going to get them in the end, or there has to be some kind of judgment that happens, we all know not really. Because there are plenty of people that did atrocious things that never came to justice. I'll use Hitler as an example. It's kind of extreme, but I'm going to use it because he did atrocious, terrible things and ended up committing suicide. They didn't get the justice. They didn't have to pay for his crimes. They didn't have to pay for anything that he did that was super terrible, horrible, disgusting, bad. So we will create a narrative of people that have that. Glenda, Jeff Mengele, I also agree. Like, we want to believe that there is some kind of divine justice when it comes to these type of people, because it goes to everything. It goes against our humanity, our good nature, our mental health, the way that we relate to each other as human beings. But we have to learn to accept that the universe does not care. So,
and there's a flip side to that too, though, right? Because if we're not sitting around waiting for karma or God or the universe to right things that are going wrong, then that means we could be working on that.
Right. And I think that, and that's what, like, for me, for example, motivated me to become an activist, is because no one is going to save you. No one is going to set things right. You have to do the work in whatever way that you can. Even just being a kinder person, being a more empathetic person, looking at bad ideas that you have, how maybe it's related to indoctrination, maybe you just got some bad takes. That is something that you can do to make the world a better place, to be a little bit more gentler, a little bit more kinder, and having empathy and kindness for your fellow human beings. I think that is a wonderful thing to achieve, being just a person, yay, so, but I understand the need to hold on to these belief systems, because when something atrocious like that happens, you want to be like, there has to be some kind of justice. Same when something really great happens, like, everything goes, like, you had an amazing year, everything went right, you met the right person, you got the job they really wanted, everybody's in good health, everybody in your family's doing great, and you'll say that you're blessed. You will say that everything's coming up roses and all these different things. And people will associate with those things with things that have nothing to do with anything external. And it's just, you and the people around you haven't doing positive things, and everything kind of just worked out the way that it did. Maybe it was because of your lucky socks. But
maybe or maybe there's another explanation.
Maybe there's another explanation. Maybe you psychologically tricked yourself with your lucky socks. You did really good in a job interview and you were in a great mood, and then you infected your partner with it. And you're like, hey, and then everything was coming up roses. And then you started influencing people around you. And your parents were just happened to be in really good health. And, your relationships were going great and your friendships are going great. For people in the religious community, they will say, I was blessed. God has given me blessings. God knows the way, blah, blah, blah. That's nice. Good for you. I'm going to go from the point, like, you did that. You are the person that did that. And And I'm going to tell you all in this chat, and though that you're listening to me later on the Spotify or on the YouTubes or whatever, everything that you do that is a positive in your life, you did it. Do not attribute it to anything supernatural. You are the person that is bringing the change you want to see to your life. And I want you to have credit for that. Because if you're giving it to somebody, to some supernatural woo-woo shit, you know, or God or Krishna or Muhammad or the flying spaghetti monster or whatever it is.
Hey, don't talk badly about the
I'm sorry, was I
the leader of our organization.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was
Good thing he's not here.
I'm sorry. I will repent later. I don't know what my repentance is, but I will repent later.
Five meatballs and a plate of pasta.
We won't let them see this episode.
That's right. Yeah, we'll skip over that. But anyway, you are not giving yourself enough credit. And that's the danger of these ideas with like magical thinking, superstitious beliefs, that sort of thing, because there's this tendency of us to want to bring these associations together. And I think that's doing us as a disservice as human beings. Because everything in the world, good and bad, is the result of us. And taking responsibility of that helps you become an active participant in the world. That's kind of my thinking on it.
Yeah, I think that's really important, Helen. I agree completely. It's one of the things that now, years later, after not being religious anymore, like just bothers me the most when someone says something like that, when, you know, you make a decision to make a change, or even if it's something simple like, you know, changing your flight reservation and then the previous flight you were on got delayed or something like that, you know, and someone will say something like, oh, the Lord really protected you, the Lord, you know, took care of you and did this, and like, no, I did that. That was me. Why are you taking away, you know, what I did? And if you think about it, if that's how you're describing everything that you do in your whole life, man, that's really sad. It's really taking away your agency to do anything in your life. I hate that. It's like almost like a learned helplessness kind of situation, which is very distressing to me to think that that's, you know, what some people are teaching.
Yeah, and I want to respond to, I went by, but I caught it in the chat, like, yes, the placebo effect is real. I'm not talking about the placebo effect. I'm just talking about us, because we have a tendency to engage in these magical thinking practices. There are people that know it's a placebo effect and are still showing positive benefits. Our brains are complicated. So I'm not going to poo-poo on that, because that's a different thing than I'm talking about. I'm not talking about like medicine. I'm talking about how psychologically we tend to do these things, especially those of us that have come from religious structures. So that's more on my talk. I'm not an expert in any way on medical placebo effects. So do not take anything I say seriously on that topic. I'm just talking about this as a layman and somebody that studies this for fun. So, but I'm well educated enough that I can do a presentation on it, I feel. If you have any poo-poo things to say about me or any criticisms, I will take them, because I want to improve and become a better person. So I will accept those as well.
I was about to say that I will boot you out of the meeting, but Helen says you can stay, so.
You can stay, yes, because I take criticism. Just be nice about it. Like, don't call me a dum-dum, because then I'll be sad. You don't want to make me sad, because then you won't be 20% cooler. And nobody wants that.
So I would argue about the placebo effect, by the way. This has come up a lot in skeptical circles, and this is in the last line in the lead in the Wikipedia article. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry to whoever put that comment in there that said it was real. It's highly questionable.
I don't have enough education on it to make one opinion one way or the other. So I'm just gonna take my hands off of that subject, because it's not something I've looked into enough to say anything either way. So I'm not going to say a damn thing about it. I also want to point out too, that people that actually have brain defects, if you will share that link, Cara, when it comes to brain lesions, this is an actual study they did with people that have brain lesions, tend to engage in magical thinking more as a development of the brain lesion. So before, they didn't really engage in a lot of magical thinking, but as the brain lesions developed, they started to engage in that behavior more. So this is another thing that we can see how this is a product of the brain and how certain influences upon the brain of how, because the brain is weird, because we have weird brains and they're very complicated. That something that just is affecting the brain is attributing to the way that someone thinks and the way that they perceive things. So I want to point out again that this is just a process of what's going on in this 8-pound organ in between our ears. Okay. This is not, it's not a criticism of you if you engage in rituals, but because this is a part of how our brains function, and even people that do not engage in magical thinking or do it on a minor sort of habit, as the brain changes, will engage more. We see this in dementia patients, where as they get older, the dementia and the Alzheimer's get worse, they will behave in behavior that does not make sense. And they will have these magical thinking moments of associating two things together that do not belong. But to them, it's making sense to them, so they can, even in their brains that are deteriorating to a certain degree, are still trying to put patterns together to reduce anxiety and to reduce the way that they're feeling and their perception of the world. So the way that I look at it, and the way the experts are looking at it, that this is not something that is not natural. This is maladaptive. This is something that everybody engages in. And when the structure of the brain changes, and especially for people that it develops into the brain kind of being sick, it tends to get worse with these certain ideas. I'm not saying everybody, because this is definitely just some studies that I have read. I am not saying that this is the be all end all, but it's something we need to take into consideration, because like as Dr. Ray has talked about, religion rewires your brain the way that the neurons connect, and connects the memory centers and the emotional centers and our perceptions of safety and all these different things into these patterns that we are constantly working through. Like, for example, I've been out of any belief system for almost 5 years. Am I still breaking shit down? Yeah. Do I find myself falling back into old patterns? Yes, because my neurons are still feeding each other and talking to one another, and I have to do conscious effort to make myself aware of the things that I'm doing. And that's really hard, because we are terrible at being differentiated. We're terrible at it. When we're emotional, when we are dealing with things that are making us not feel safe, when we're dealing with things that make us feel like there's chaos, if we're feeling strong emotional reactions to things, especially for example, if you are a queer person, for example, and someone's asking questions about the queer community that you have heard from bigots, your emotional brain is going to kick in first before you're going to see if you're engaging with an honest interlocutor. I'm just using this as an example, because we are emotional creatures and we don't always differentiate as well as we could. So an example of magical thinking, when we're working to digest things and break them down, you have to differentiate yourself from your emotions, because your emotions, again, are valid but not rational. So if there's a habit that you've developed over like an emotional comfort, that there's a divine justice that happens when things go to shit for a human being. Really walking through and looking at that is the hard part, because our emotional selves will want to fall into the pattern of what we believe, and everything leads to the other. So, and I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not like I've done it. I've done the work, and I continue to do the work, because it is not easy. and you will find yourself falling into certain patterns over and over again, not because you're failing at it. It's just because of just the way your brain is, and being aware of it, like Cara was saying, like falls into prayer, doesn't believe in a deity anymore, but it's just the brain is like, okay, we're under anxiety, we're feeling scared and not safe. Let me do the thing I know to make me feel safe.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and when you explain it that way, it also kind of explains to me how sometimes I'll accidentally lapse into those like magical thinking episodes when I'm really in a hurry or I'm under stress or something like that. And it's like the parts of your brain that are doing the rational thinking are starting to turn off when you're having those, high stress, high emotional experiences. I'm thinking of something they used to say at my previous job about under stress, you don't rise to the occasion, you revert to the level of your training, which is
Yep.
kind of, that's what this is. If you've been trained to think in magical terms, then that's what's going to pop up when the rest of your brain starts to shut down.
And like, this is a small side tangent, but I wonder, because in religious structures we're taught to feel guilt for not meeting up to a certain expectation, if that transfers over into the skeptical atheist sort of perception of things. Because, well, if I don't have a perfectly rational worldview, and if I don't look at things like as realistic as possible, somehow I'm not a good skeptic or not a good atheist or whatever you are, because yes, I will admit there's a lot of judgment in the atheist community, and it's not healthy. And because everybody has to go on their own journey, but some people are asshats and are now welcoming people that are going through the process. Like, they may not believe in deity anymore. They may not, and they're trying to work through the magical thinking, the supernatural thinking, working with the stuff that correlation versus causation. We hear this all the time with RfR. We have people that are in that place, and they're afraid to approach the atheist community because they're not always welcoming to them, because they're like, well, you still believe like putting on your lucky socks is going to have some kind of effect. You're a dum-dum. That's not healthy, because we all do this. We all have our biases. We have terrible thinking. We are not 100% rational. We are a walking meat bag of thoughts and emotions and anxieties and traumas and personalities and all this shit, and biological creatures that were, responding to stimuli and all this stuff. And you are not going to be perfectly logical and rational all the time. It's literally impossible as a human being. So my advice, and you don't have to take it, but like, okay, I'm not going to give advice. I'm going to just give an opinion, because I don't give advice. I just want people that cut yourself some slack. And also for people that are being asshats, to people that are going through the process, don't be asshats, because I'm sure if we had a conversation, I could find things that you have magical thinking about and have some bad takes on, and things that you need to deconstruct and look at. So maybe we should be more welcoming to one another and not treat people like, they should be perfectly rational beings 100% of the time. Because are we that? No, and not in any way.
Or would we want to be? Probably.
No, God, how boring would that be?
That would be very boring.
We wouldn't have art.
Right. We wouldn't have empathy for other people.
Right.
That would be sad. And I feel like also this overvalorization of, logic and rationality, those are great things. It's good to use logic and rationality, but you get the sense that that's a little bit rooted in some kind of like toxic masculinity, sexism, sure, and ideas that men are associated with these traits and women are emotional and women equal bad.
Yeah, and I think that also too, like, I think that the science, like, when we're looking at studies, they're structured in a way to explain the information. What was the hypothesis? What was the execution? what was the result, and how do we publish these studies, and peer reviewed, and what studies this was built off, and blah blah blah. They're not giving you any emotional fucking context for this fucking study, because even when they're studying emotion, they're not going to use emotional language. They're going to use scientific language. So when you're reading a study, also too, this is when your bias is going to turn on, because when you read things that do not agree with your bias, you will tend to reject the study, even though it was well researched. So that's hard to get over. I'm still working on it.
We all do it.
We all do it. It's not great, but the thing is, though, it leads into like these logical sort of frameworks, because like science is supposed to be like a very masculine perception of study. And then like feminine stuff is like, I don't know, like raising children and nurturing, and I don't know, that kind of woo-woo, like social sciences and stuff like that. And I'm going to move my cat. Say hi, baby.
Oh, okay. It's Kitty. It's Bellatrix.
Okay, I'm going to put her on the floor because she's going to get into my stuff. Anyway.
She's getting big.
So these perceptions of like the men being completely logical, that's why, like, you know, I'm sure you've experienced this, Cara, and the other women and women identifying people in this chat. When we are coming against these things, we're like, well, I read, you know, like, oh, you know what, like, you can't really understand science, you know, you're too emotional to understand it, you know, or you come up with these ideas like, well, you're just going to put your own womanly ideas onto the science. It's all rooted in that stuff, because men think that they're perfectly rational. They don't engage in magical thinking. And I'm not saying all men, okay? So don't come at me.
Hashtag not all men.
Hashtag not men. I'm talking about men that haven't deconstructed their own perceptions and are still seeing the world in this black and white thinking. Okay, so nobody at me. Okay?
Yeah, and sometimes this kind of thing is just like an idea that's kind of floating around in the social ether, if you will.
Too, and women identify people thinking too, because it's just something that's just become a part of the nomenclature, the way that we relate to one another. Like emotion is female, logic is male.
That's
these are just
true.
words that we use and do not have genders. These are just words.
I had a seminar in a gender studies class in graduate school, and our professor summed this up, and like she just like ended the conversation, I feel like, in one sentence. We were talking about this one time, and she just said, "Anger is an emotion, isn't it?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, you're right." And she's like, okay, so let's not say that women are emotional and men are rational, because people are both.
Right. And also, I think, you know, when we have these sort of ideas in our head, again, this is not how I expected this talk to go, but I'm going to go this route because this is where we're on. It's a form of magical thinking, because everybody has emotions and everybody has the ability to think and rationally think things out. But if we start associating emotions with women and logic with men, and I'm talking in like the binary, you know, but but I'm just using the binary as an example because that's the way it's been constructed.
Yeah, typically people that think in those terms are not thinking about non-binary and trans and anybody else
on the gender spectrum. So I'm using the binary as my example. It is because these ideas have just been implemented and pushed into your brain. But do they have any real world solid evidence to say that this is the way things are? Obviously, no, because there's been studies done about this. And guess what? Women can be logical and men can be emotional. Holy shit, people. It's like we're human beings walking around.
What? No, I don't believe it.
Or perhaps Vulcans. Gene Roddenberry tried to reverse the situation about Vulcans, right? Because the men go into Ponfar, where they're clearly irrational every 7 years, and the women don't do that. They remain calm.
That's true.
That's right.
True. That show was ahead of its time in many ways, not always, but
now there's if you put on your I'm going to look this through a feminist theory hat, there's some issues, but we won't go into that. But if you look at Gene Roddenberry's past, womanizer. But anyway,
There's
moving on.
one episode of the original series that I don't watch, but
Yeah, there's some problems.
Y'all know which
but
one
we're
it is.
moving on. We're not here to talk about see, it is an RfRx talk. We talked about Star Trek.
Yeah. This is going to come up again in the hangout, so stick around for that.
Yeah, for sure. So,
okay, back on track. Sorry, I have been accused multiple times of derailing conversations with feminism.
Let me look at where I am on my list, because this is why I wrote an outline.
You're going to tell us how to break out of magical thinking,
okay,
I think.
So I kind of touched on this before, but let me give you how I think you're going to break this down the same way you would break down a religious thought or a religious construct that you have. So, for example, if you have a tendency to knock on wood for something good to happen or to reject something bad happening, ask yourself, why are you doing it? What association, especially, where did you learn it? And as you work yourself through it, does it make sense? Does it actually show, like 100% of the time, that when you knocked on wood, something good happened, or you prevented something bad to happen, or whatever it is? Or are you counting the hits and ignoring the misses? Because I guarantee you're probably doing that.
It's probably that.
So, but also too, is it a benign thing that you do that isn't affecting people in a wider whole? If you just do it out of habit, because it's giving you a little bit of comfort, that's fine. I'm not going to poo-poo on that, because we all do this. But if it's something that you think that, why in a wider context do we knock on wood? Why do people believe that it works? Why do people believe that think that they're having an effect on anything when they do something as simple as knocking on wood? Those are the type of questions you have to ask yourself, because you're looking at it in a broader context of the social understanding of the habit and the psychological impact of that. You're looking at it from a sociological perspective rather than a personal comfort or emotional gain that you're getting out of it. Because if it's an emotional gain, you're not affecting anything else. But you have to look at it in a broader context of a sociological practice, because then you're going to be moving into this idea that, well, everybody should be doing it. This should be a thing, Or you take it a step further, like, well, everybody knocks on wood, and not everybody does. Just maybe people like on the Westerners probably do it, and people that believe in, magical or superstitious thinking. Does it hold any validity? And does it hold any real world consequences, good or bad, in the construct of what you're doing? That's how so you have to look at it like when you're deconstructing your belief in a God, when you're looking at your how you think about, like, your religion and the things that you were taught. You have to look at it in the same way. You have to look at it, this was a superstitious idea that has just become a part of who I am, and it doesn't serve me anymore. Because and that's the thing, is that, again, you can leave the structure of religion, but if you're not looking at our habits, the way that you communicate with people, the way that you're relating to the world, and your psychological framework of your ideas of how things work, you're not being a skeptic. You're just rejecting religion. And again, you can be an atheist and believe in things like The Secret. So it's really important to look at all the things that you do that were done in this context, either from religion, sociological expectation, psychological expectation, cultural norms, and do they make sense? If they don't make any logical sense and don't have any sort of real world impact on things, if it makes you feel good to do it, like I said, like I have good parking karma every time I get a good parking space, because 99% of the time I'm alone in my car, and I'm not saying everybody should do it. It's just something that makes me feel better. Okay. But if I start going around telling people, like, if you start saying that I have good parking karma, when you get a good parking space, and every time you'll get a good parking space, because like it doesn't work 100% of the time. I guarantee it probably doesn't even work 50% of the time.
Well, parking karma answers all prayers, but
It
sometimes
does.
the answer is no.
Right, exactly. I can do the same reason if I was praying for, $1 million.
Parking karma works in mysterious ways.
It does. Yes. The parking God will decide.
Sometimes it wants you to get more exercise. I don't know.
The God of Toyota is telling me.
Sometimes the best things are unanswered prayers.
Exactly.
That's a country western song.
Maybe I need to do more exercise by parking further away.
At that parking spot, there's going to be a truck that's going to plow into the car if you were parked there. So, yeah.
There's a pack of wild shopping carts that are running straight towards that spot.
That's actually a good. I'm sorry. I'm going to also say this too. So those of you that usually take a usual route home from work, okay, and then for some reason your brain goes, let's take a different way home, okay. For some reason, people say like, oh my, the universe was telling me I should go this, or God or whatever, because if I had taken the usual way home, I may have gotten into a car accident, or if there was a car accident that just happened to happen, like, oh, you know what, I was protected from that. Okay. My question was like, well, why wasn't the person that was in the car accident protected from the accident? Like, aren't they worthy of protection and care too? Just you? Okay.
Yeah, why are you so special?
Right, why are you so special? But we do this all the time. Like, that's the thing. We do this over and over again. I had a friend that thought that she could change the colors of the stoplights. Okay. Because just by concentrating on it, somehow the light would turn green faster, when really it's all on a fucking timer.
That's a common one. Also, that it's associated with thinking that your presence or thoughts can affect the status of any kind of electronics.
Right.
I remember as a kid, we had a street light in front of our house, and it weirdly, unpredictably flickered off a minute, came back on the rest of the day. And if I happened to be walking under it when it did that, it's like, oh, I caused that because I was here. And I remember as a young kid thinking that was true, because it did it a lot of times in a row. And then it stopped doing it.
And it probably did it a lot of times when you weren't walking under it too, but you never noticed that because you weren't there.
Right, you weren't paying conscious attention to it.
So there are people who think that they can actually, there's a paranormal prize worth $500,000 that the Center for Inquiry runs, and to prove any paranormal powers. And there are people who apply who say they can do this with electronics. They can go in a room and fry a television by thinking about it, or things like that. And for some reason they never pass because it doesn't work when they're tested.
Shocking.
Weird.
I used to belong to an internet group like that too, and they had this idea that I have a chronic health condition, and I was in this support group online of people that had it, and I noticed this thing. There was a whole bunch of people that had this condition that does not have anything to do with electromagnetism or whatever, that would insist that this medical condition made them be able to change stoplights when thinking about it, and also made them water witches, which is apparently a term used to describe people that think they can find or locate water. Yeah, it was the weirdest thing to me, but somehow they had associated it as, this outcome of having a medical condition.
To add on to that, when I belonged to the Psychic Education Center, I worked there were people that taught dowsing as a form of spiritual practice. So
my friend Dan claimed when he was a child, he did it with his brother. I guess remotely, people would mail them a map many states away. They would douse over the map and mark the spot and mail the map back. This is where you have to drill.
Now, I imagine that if you make a big mark with the Sharpie on a map,
are you doing a Texas sharpshooter fallacy card?
Yeah. I'm just thinking that's going to cover enough area that there's probably water somewhere in that 8-mile square area.
Well, the truth is somebody with an acre or something, and pretty much it's going to be anywhere you drill on their property. It's either water or not water. It's it's not going to make a difference by a little amount, and a lot of subsurface has water in it. So that's why people think that works.
I would be more impressed if it was in the middle of the Sahara. That's the ultimate test. Okay, I'm find a place in the Sahara, and if I drill, I get water.
Well, the
Do
ultimate
it.
test actually, there's a YouTube video of this. James Randi went to, I think the name is James Randi in Australia. He went there
Yeah.
to test dowsing because it was big in Australia. And they had these pipes that they put water in or not, and they had a valve they could take it out or whatever, and they buried them. And nobody who was there could do it right, except any better than chance. And they were all mystified. I don't know why it's not working today.
Oh my goodness.
And
Wow, that's weird.
I saw an article about this one time, and I won't say the name of it, like a major, like reputable newspaper ran an article about, someone that was doing dowsing for water, and it's suggesting that this was a legitimate thing. It was incredible to me, but people spend money on this service.
Does not shock me. The New York Times just in the last few weeks
Yeah.
ran a whole article basically promoting, psychics.
Yeah, that was the one, actually.
That's a different topic that we could totally do another whole episode on.
Yeah. Sorry, Helen, we keep getting off topic here.
No, but because it all relates to each other. Like believing
it's all
psychics,
magical thinking.
It's all magical thinking.
No good
Psychics,
evidence.
spiritualism, mediums, believing in God exists, that somehow if you put some water on yourself and do the sign of the cross, somehow you're blessed and protected from demons. Like this is all practices that have just become a part of our culture that we do because not for any rational reason. It's either sociological, psychological, cultural, or personal. Like these are just things that we do. And
I have to throw a science fiction thing in here.
Okay.
Andor, the Disney Plus Star Wars series,
Yes.
right? This is on in a universe, in a galaxy far, far away, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are no Christians or Catholics, hypothetically. At a moment of crisis in the prison, in the background, there was somebody who did the sign of the cross.
Yep.
Dow.
And I can't even imagine like, an atheist in a foxhole just doing it out of habit because it's anxiety. And you did that as a form of self-comfort to yourself when you were in a religious practice. You just like you falling into prayer practices, me saying I have good parking karma, me, praying that I always say like when something's going wrong, I'm like, please, Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, flying spaghetti monster, Bob the Wonder Toast, whoever's paying attention, help me do this. I am an atheist. I do not believe in anything, not only God's, I don't believe in anything supernatural, but when I'm feeling desperate, I will fall into prayer mode and start praying to anybody that's fucking listening to me because I'm just trying to alleviate anxiety within myself.
Could that possibly include the alien teenager in his basement on his computer, which is running the simulation of our entire planet? And if he sees you're struggling and cares, he might help you.
I need to start praying to my alien overlords as well.
Yeah. Okay. I have last funny story. When I was living in Japan, we were going on field trips to visit these statues of, Buddha figures that are called daibutsu in Japanese, and we kept going on these field trips, and it's lovely. There are like some really interesting, cultural sites with these daibutsu statues. And one time we were going by bicycle, and somebody was on their bicycle and was like going to have an accident or talking about a time that they almost had a bicycle accident, and she all of a sudden goes, "Daibutsu, take the wheel." It was the best thing ever. So I still sometimes say that just because it makes me laugh, not because I think the statue's going to do anything.
It is really interesting. Like, I know we're coming to the end of this and I want to move into Q&A, but like, this is something that you should just look into of how people form magical ideas, even with not even with them, like study other cultures. Cause we all do this. We're all human beings walking around making weird shit up. It's just what we do. And there's the magical thinking versus Westerners might be completely different. For example, in Japan, the number 4 is cursed. Here's number 13. When I asked someone from Japan, why is it cursed? They couldn't really tell me why it was cursed. It was just a bad number. Same for the number 13. When you ask someone in the American cultural people, like, why is the number 13 bad? I don't know. I just heard it was bad. 99% of the time.
12, which is a nice number that everything divides into even, maybe, I don't know, prime number.
Yeah, but 3 is a prime number. It's 3. Yeah.
In Japanese, the word for the number 4 shares a similarity to the word that means death.
Yeah, that's what I thought there was a reason for that. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. But so but again, these are just language.
So if you fly,
it's always the same thing. It's just language and cultural context and psychological context and all this shit.
Helen, how serious are they about that one? Like if you fly JAL, is there no row 4? Because on American planes, there are no row 13s.
There aren't?
Oh my God, you've never noticed this? No, every time I'm on a plane, I look, nope, no 13. They conveniently skip right over it.
It's the same with the elevators.
I never noticed that on planes, and I go on planes a lot.
It's the same on planes.
Now you look and you'll notice it every time.
Wow. Okay, I'm gonna look for that.
Yeah, you're gonna. Yeah, and it's so weird because it's like psychologically, I know they're 12 to 14 doesn't exist. I understand the order of numbers. And then you're on a fucking elevator and it's it says 14, but I'm really on 13. Don't lie to me. I know how to count. I learned this in grade school.
Right. How does that really help? Just not calling it 13. It still is the 13th floor.
So the probable reason for that, thinking about, all right, the guys who designed the airline or who label the rows is people will not want to buy a seat in that, right? And the same with a building. If it's a resident, I'm not going to buy an apartment on the third. So that's how they get it. That's why they do it.
You can have whole rows and floors of buildings full of skeptics.
Right. And that's the thing, though, is that this has become magical thinking and superstition has become so much a part of everyday life that it is affecting the way that hotels are constructed, airplanes, how we relate to one another, Friday the 13th, don't do anything that's going to cause bad luck. If something goes bad, it's because it's Friday the 13th. And I'm unless Jason Voorhees attacks you.
So right up to
nothing bad should happen.
In the early days of the space shuttle program, the flights were STS 1, 2, 3, and they went all the way up to 12. Guess what they did when it hit 13? They relabeled it and made it 51 LG4. So each letter or number meant something, but they didn't. And then when they got well past 13, they went back to counting by numbers.
You know what? I know that Sesame Street's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. They stopped at 12.
They're teaching this to kids from a young
age. I know. So 13's bad, y'all. For some reason I don't understand.
Why is that the case? Rob, do you know?
No, it never has come up. The only article I read about it was people who push back on it, including famously Taylor Swift, because her birthday is on the 13th. She's got a 13 tattoo.
So if you're 13 years old, are you the manifestation of bad luck from the devil? If you're a 13-year-old person,
can you imagine if you were born on Friday the 13th?
Or you're born on Friday the 13th, or you're born on the 13th? Yeah, that's interesting. That is a study that could be conducted on how people perceive themselves being on the 13th in a sociological study of how they perceive themselves within in society. That would be a really interesting study on how the magical thinking has affected certain individuals. Just a side note, it's probably not going to happen. It was just a fun thought experiment for me. Okay, can we move on to Q&A?
Yes, let's do that now. So, thank you, Helen, for
because the three of us are friends and we will fall into our usual discussions and tangents. And I'm trying to do a presentation.
Damn, I was just going to bring up Lord of the Rings, but okay, go ahead.
All right, we'll do Q&A, I guess.
I will talk about Lord of the Rings till the cows come home.
Sounds like the door is open.
Yes, exactly. Because you are my friend.
Okay, we'll do some questions, and then there might be a question about Lord of the Rings mixed in there. I don't know. I'm just predicting that might happen. Who's to say? We do have some questions, so we will do those now. And don't forget, there's a hangout after this, so you see where that's going.
So you can ask all the questions you want until 11:30 when I turn to a pumpkin.
Yes. Okay, you know what? I'm going to start with one that I may have accidentally missed, and I think this is a fun one. And the question is, Helen, what is your opinion on Ouija boards?
Okay, so there have actually been tests on people that have done Ouija boards blindfolded. they are asked questions. This was on actually Penn Teller's Bullshit on Ouija boards. You should totally watch that episode. But what they did, they took participants and blindfolded them, and they flipped the Ouija board around so no clear words were being shown. And they still did the same thing where they felt that their fingers were being controlled, that there was a channeling sensation that happened, and that they were having some kind of like body possession, spiritual experience, blah, blah, blah. What is happening is that this is group psychology also wanting that you have a prediction that your brain is already making that you want to see happen. Okay. And we tend to do, and like as someone that has a Ouija board in her house that her husband made, and I use it as decor. It's awesome. It's very pretty.
That's how the demons get in.
That's why I'm an atheist.
Except I saw they have on sale a one specifically designed with the right pictures and terminology that it's specifically designed to contact, wait for it, Jesus.
Oh, there's that new one. Who was talking about on the ACA about the Jesus Ouija board?
I know. I saw it on Facebook. I didn't know they were talking.
I think Dan was talking about it.
Brilliant marketing to allow Christians to buy a Ouija board.
Okay, sorry.
Jesus called the ACA last week.
He did, you are now a believer, Cara. I heard him too.
I missed that.
We are believers. Okay, so let me get back on the track of the Ouija boards. Okay, so if you let's just say you had a family member that passed, you're going to have a very strong emotional connection with that family member that passed, and you're going to sit in front of a Ouija board, and usually you do some kind of chanting, sort of prayer, sort of like meditative practice. So your conscious mind takes a little bit of a back seat, and you're going to allow your intuitive mind, look, I'm using quotes, to affect the effects of the Ouija board. But what happens is everybody starts influencing each other. You will feel a push and pull when you use the planchette. And then what happens is that subtle dominant force will move the planchette around. There is nothing magical, spiritual that's happening. It is all subconscious reactions of that part of your brain that are making it move. And if you have strong emotional reactions to things, like especially like if you're trying to contact like your dead mom or whatever that is, the emotions will influence, even though you're not consciously aware of it, because this is the thing that our brains are amazing at tricking ourselves. We are very, very good at tricking ourselves. We are not always logical. We are not always aware of what's going on because, as I said, we're a bunch of meat bags walking around having reactions to shit. And especially if you're coming from that bias, I'm going to connect with like my dead mom, you are already expecting a response. And then if you're like, usually you're doing the Ouija board with like your friends or people that have similar beliefs that you do, they're going to support that. If they're already primed to believe in supernatural thinking, they're going to support that supernatural thinking, and then you will see the results that you want. So I love Ouija boards because I love spooky shit. Do I think they have any validity? No.
So I put a link for what's called the ideomotor phenomena, which explains in detail how they work. And it's connected to what we were talking about before. It's also how dowsers think they're doing something real, right? And there's something in, it's a pseudoscientific approach to having people who are locked in communicate called facilitated communications. And that's also the same thing. The facilitators are holding their arm and actually moving it without realizing it, just like you move a planchette on a Ouija board.
And I also want to say something too, as someone that was part of like the pagan community and the psychic community. I saw this over and over and over again. and never showed real concrete answers of someone telling you the exact date that they were born, the exact date that they died, how they died, exact information about family members or friends that were actually experiencing these things. It's all very vague and kind of open to interpretation kind of stuff. Rather, like if I ask Kara personal information about themselves, or Rob personal information about, like when were you born? Where were you born? What's your mom's name? Whatever that is, I can get that specific information. You will never get that through a Ouija board or a medium or anything like that, unless they have direct access to that information. And I fight against that because it's emotional manipulation to people that have experienced loss, and that they need to deal with that loss. And if you're still holding on to the need to speak to your dead relative or dead friend, I understand that, because I have lost people that are very close to me and I loved fairly deeply too, and I would love to talk to again. But I'm always on, because I've met these people, I've worked with these people, I worked in an industry that that manipulated people. I don't want someone to fall that into again. And I'd rather you go to a professional psychologist to deal with your grief than to go see a medium. Just make yourself feel better in reality, because not everything in reality is going to make you feel good, unfortunately. But I'd rather you have the health and the ability to get through it than someone giving you false hope.
That's fair. All right, Rob, do you have another question for us?
This one interested me. It was one of the first ones that got typed into the questions in the chat. If you have a negative expectation, such as expecting a prayer not to be answered and then finding that confirmed because nothing happens, is that also magical thinking?
Yes. Because it's the same thing as that you're making associations between one thing that happened or versus something that didn't. So let's say you didn't pray for, to, let me think of something benign. You didn't pray for like to get a cat. Okay. Like you weren't thinking about getting a cat. You didn't want a cat. And then all of a sudden a cat shows up. Okay. And you fall in love with the kitty cat and you adopt it. And it can, and then this kitty cat is like the perfect cat. Like it is the best cat. You love its personality, and
except that they scream very loudly when you're in Zoom session.
Listen, I appreciate your kitty cat being very vocal as a cat owner.
Feature.
It's a feature. It's not a bug. I think it's adorable. But so you're going to associate, well, maybe there was some kind of divine intervention made me have this amazing cat. Maybe this cat's, you always wanted a lap cat, and this cat like loves to sit in your lap and loves to get cuddles and kisses and pets and treats, and you think it's the best cat. You didn't pray for the cat, but you're having this very strong emotional reaction to the kitty cat. Because I'm using this as an example. As a cat lover, I have two, and they are my fur demons, and I love them to death. So I'm using this as my example. And those of us that are on the chat that are big cat lovers or dog lovers, I am a cat biaser, so I'm going to use cat. So you form this really strong emotion and connection with the cat, and you didn't pray for the cat. You didn't think you wanted a cat, but it feels divinely inspired. Like the universe aligned for you to get this cat that you didn't know you needed this fucking cat. It's just because the cat was awesome. Like you just did it, like you started forming these emotional bonds with it, and something in the back of your brain was like, you know what? Maybe I need a companion. Maybe I do need a kitty cat, because like cats are adorable, and we have this prime instinct in our brain to take care of things that are super cute. Like we just do it as human beings. Like we want to take care of cats and dogs and babies. Like it's just what we do. It feels like sometimes I feel like my cats are little gods because I'm always doing things for them. I am such a good food slave. I worship them.
I have a refrigerator magnet which says something like, you never forget the cats were worshipped in ancient Egypt as gods, and they have never forgotten that.
Right, exactly. Like my cats have definitely not forgotten it. So this is the same idea. You make associations, even though you didn't exactly ask for it. If it feels like meant to be, that's what I use, meant to be. You'll start making associations like, obviously the universe thought that I needed a new kitty cat. And it's the same sort of idea. You don't have to even psychologically ask for anything. People tend to do this anyway, make associations as later on, trying to make sense of the randomness. Like I met my husband at the time when I was going through a divorce. I was very unhappy in my marriage. And then I met my husband. And I felt at the time that the universe was sending him to me because he was the perfect person for me. And luckily, we have been together for 18 years. He is the most wonderful, he is my best friend, and it worked out. So I'm just going to ask, was it the universe? Or if it didn't work out, was it divine? And those are the type, that's the thing, because relationships are just the luck of the draw, personality, blah, blah, blah. You know, how you've learned to relate to each other, how you work through your problems, all this type of stuff. There's nothing external going on, but we get these ideas from like movies that you have your perfect someone, and that someone's going to bring you fulfillment and everything will go okay, and blah, 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 blah. And I can tell you as a poly person, a queer person, and someone that's married, that is not true. It is very complicated. We are very complicated and complex creatures that will get, and I'm not like, if some people are happy in monogamy, stay in monogamy. If you're happy being a poly person, be a poly person. I'm somewhere in between. That's fine. It's okay. So this is a very complicated sort of question that we're asking ourselves, but because we live in a Christo, a monogamous society, we're taught that there's supposed to be like this divine someone, and it's supposed to be meant to be. Again, that's magical thinking, because humans are complicated and it's not as simple as that. So that's another example. Anyway, I went on a tangent because I tend to go on tangents on these topics because I find them interesting. So let's move on to the next question.
That's why you're speaking on the topic this evening.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I've got a question that I think is really interesting here. This one says, I used to be comforted by a sense of God ultimately judging evil and settling the score, but now I get a strong impulse to dish out justice myself since I can't rely on that anymore. But right now, I don't even leave bad online reviews to people who deserve them, but I feel like one day I'll explode as a whistleblower or something major. It's unsettling. How can I relieve the tension? The most I do now is occasionally honk at a jaywalker, but I feel like a storm is coming. Should I just adopt a harmless concept of karma for now before I explode?
That's a complicated question. That was a lot more than I expected it to be. Can you read it one more time? Because I need to like kind of absorb it a little bit more.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think the gist of it is that they're saying they used to rely on God to dish out justice, but now that they can't, they feel like it's on them, but they don't want to blow up at somebody and do something harmful to someone that has done something wrong. So would it be less harmful to have a false but comforting belief that karma or the universe or something like that would dish out justice instead? And do you want me to reread it?
No, I got it. I got it.
Yeah.
Okay. This is very complicated, and I'm going to tell you my perspective on it. You can decide if this makes sense to you, or if you want to explore more, getting other opinions, that's fine. I don't, okay. If you want to call people out on their shit, if they're being like an asshat, call them out on their shit. I know that there is a tendency to want to hold for some kind of like karmic understanding of the world and want to, and like I do this too. I am not saying I'm immune for this. Like when someone's terrible, like I'm gonna, like certain politicians and stuff, I want them to get some kind of karmic fucking justice because they are terrible people and they're causing a lot of harm to a lot of people. And I keep hoping they will get their comeuppance. And when they do, I eat it up like candy. Like I'm like, no. Like when Alice Jones is had all this, like when he lost his loss, when he had to pay all this money to the victims of Sandy Hook and stuff like that, I was eating that up like candy. It was beautiful. And I felt like there was some kind of justice in the world. That was just luck, because there are plenty of people that don't receive that karmic justice. They don't receive that idea of how we see the world is supposed to work when we are people of empathy and people that want to have some kind of understanding of justification. Like we want to see bad people get reprimanded for doing bad things. And I understand that desire. I don't think, honestly, even if you did personal karma or relying on a God, it's going to make any sort of difference. I might give you an idea of comfort, and I don't want to poo-poo on that because I don't want anyone to feel distress. But I would ask yourself, what is my ultimate goal? Because ultimately, do you want to see people that do terrible things and harm other human beings brought to some kind of realistic justice for us? So you may not be a lawyer, but what do you do as a citizen to make those outcomes happen, even though they're difficult? Because karma and relying on God to work it all out, like, you know, like God will work it out, ask questions later kind of mentality, isn't going to solve the fucking problem. So I'm going to say this over and over again, and I wish it was easier. You have to take action in the way that you see fit, because just wanting something to happen will not make it happen. And I think that we tend as human beings to be lazy. We tend to want things to have simple answers. And I think on a personal level, especially those that come from religious structures, that we want to believe in karma. There's some kind of force that is trying to balance the scales. Ultimately, the only scales that are going to be balanced are the ones that we decide. And you as an individual can do your one small part. And you just got to figure out what that is if you want to see some kind of justice or, you know, advocacy or change to happen. And I think that we tend to fall into those ideas of karma, God's going to work it out. You know, somebody else will do it. That's another thing that happens too. And ultimately, that's just something that you have to kind of take the mantle up on. And because I don't want to give you saying like, oh, no, it's fine. Like believe in, you know, the karmic stuff. I'm not going to say that because I don't believe in karma, even on a personal level. I believe that we are the only ones that are ultimately going to make change, and that karma comes from the things that we do.
Okay, we're going to ask one more, Cara?
Yeah.
Okay.
Your pick.
All right. So I don't know if you've done any looking into this, but I'll ask it. If you haven't, just say so. What about people who've lived through childhood trauma? Do they tend to engage in magical thinking more often than the average?
I do not know, to be honest with you.
Okay, yeah, I thought that might be the case. That's a kind of esoteric question.
Yeah, I cannot answer that question. I can answer it on my own personal experience, because as someone that went through trauma as a child, I'm not going to cite studies or anything like that. I'm just going to give you my personal experience to answer this question. I think that when I was a child, and especially as an adolescent, I experienced a lot of sexual abuse. Trigger warning, I'm not going to go into detail, but if this is a topic that you're uncomfortable with it, please step out, because I don't want anyone to be triggered or anything like that. Or so as I went through adolescence and definitely adulthood, I started contributing magical thinking in the way that I was like, well, these are lessons that I'm supposed to learn. Like I went through trauma to become the person that I am today. You know, I went through trauma because there was a greater plan involved, you know, or my soul on some kind of ether plane decided it for me. Okay, this is very toxic, I guess, because it's very victim blaming. Like somehow I caused my trauma to happen to me. I'm trying to work out some karmic justice or balance, you know, through the traumas that I've experienced. So I can't say as a whole for people that have gone through childhood trauma if they engage in this thinking. I can only, because I grew up in religion, then I converted to paganism, which it has a lot of woo-woo, you know, twisted psychology beliefs, you know, and mixture of like science and pseudoscience and spiritualism and all that type of stuff. It's a complicated road that I'm not going to go down right now, but I can say it definitely influenced the way that I reflected on my trauma and the way that I dealt with it. And I can see it as a psychological shield, because until I went to therapy and really looked at what happened to me and looked at it for what it was and had someone that was a trauma expert work through with me, it was a lot easier to use a spiritual route to deal with it, because that you have that protective shield there. Because when you're dealing with it, it's so painful, and you have to look at it for what it is, not for what you want it to be. And that's really hard. But if you have a good therapist, like through the Secular Therapy Project, they can help you deal with those things, because you want to get a trauma related, someone that's trained in trauma, and help you work through it. And that was the only way that I got through it. And I think that for also, like we've heard from people that have come from religious communities that pray to God to get them through their trauma. And it worked for a little while. You know, it worked to give them a little bit of comfort, but the thing is, though, the dragon is always going to want to raise its head. The dragon will always appear, because it's going to say like, hey, you know what, you're ignoring me. Your subconscious is like, hey, you're ignoring me. Hey, you're not really functioning healthily. Hey. And you have to do the really heavy lifting, which can take years. It took me 6 years to deal with my trauma and really work through it. It is not an easy fucking process. Some people can do it in, like, I've heard people get it done in like 3 months. I think that's amazing. It took me 6 years, because I not only had to untangle the trauma, I had to untangle my spiritualism and my Catholic upbringing, which infected the way that I viewed it. And to break that all down and really looked at it for what it is. And it's not an easy fucking process. I am no way going to say it's easy, but am I a much healthier mental, emotional person for it? Yes. That's why I'm not breaking down, losing my shit right now when I talk about it, because I've dealt with it. But the thing is, though, is that, so I don't know, but I have a suspicion from stories I've heard from people that have gone through trauma and dealt with these ideas of like, God's going to take care of it. You know, I have a protector, you know, God wanted me to go through this for a certain reason. That gives you an unreal sense of comfort, because trauma is not rational the way that it affects the brain. It is all emotional and reactionary. And the way that we process that comes through work. And I think that the religious community wants to sweep it under the rug, wants to think that prayer and, you know, being around people that support you, but not actually talking about it will make it fix it, to make it go away. And I don't think that's healthy, because as a trauma survivor, you have to do the fucking bullshit of the work. And it's not easy, but please, if you are, okay, I'm not just saying for the person that asked me this question, I'm just talking in general. If you've been through any sort of trauma and you have not dealt with it in a way with a professional, please contact the Secular Therapy Project. Please contact a trauma specialist that can actually help you deal with this, because putting Band-Aids on it, not going to do a whole lot of good. I'm just saying. So, but like, still seek support out, like find friends and family and people that love you, hang out here that wants to support you. Like we will support you, but the only way you're going to really get to the root of it and move beyond it is talking to a professional. So I'm going to push that till I die. Like I'm going to be pushing mental health care the whole way.
Well, thank you, Helen. That was really a personal response to that difficult question.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That was really good. And for anybody that stepped away, you can come back now, and I put that in the chat as well. Okay, we are just about out of time. Helen, that was amazing. That was a wonderful talk. You shared a lot of good information. I am going to drop all of the links that you shared with us in the chat. And there was one other question which someone was asking, or one of the other questions was someone was asking if you have any good books or resources for understanding magical thinking that you would like to share with us. I'm going to share the ones that you already gave us. Are there any others besides that you want to talk about?
Those are the type of, okay, like to be honest, like all my preliminary thinking has come from like, scientific articles and Psychology Today and things like that online. But there's like even the Wikipedia article, if you go down into the resources at the bottom, there's so much information on this. I'm going to find out what episode of Explained, for example, was shown to talk about that study, because this is a very interesting topic. Like I find it really fascinating, because even for people that are not religious, engage in these activities and the psychological, mental gymnastics that we do to just function in the world. So for me, there's so much research out there. Just put in like studies on magical thinking into your Google bar. Academic resources. I would also put that, because you don't want to get rando shit. Okay.
Click Google Scholar when you're searching.
Google Scholar. Yeah, definitely.
Go in advanced search and click Google Scholar, or just go search Google Scholar, click on that, and it will only give you academic resources.
Yeah, you don't want to just get some rando telling you about magical thinking. Like get people that have actually done the scientific. Go to Google Scholar. Thank you, Kara, as a reminder, because that is the only way that you're going to get any sort of accurate information on it. But
don't go on TikTok for it either. It's like full of people with magical thinking.
Don't talk to charlatans, because there's plenty of charlatans that claim that they're psychologists too. So, and psychiatrists. So don't listen to them. They don't know the hell they're talking about. Don't listen to life coaches, basically, I'm going to tell you. But like, there's a lot of studies that are being done upon it. And like we've had talks on here before that kind of touch on the subject, but I wanted to go a little bit more deeper into it. But this is something that we just all engage in as human beings. And I just want to help people become a little bit more skeptical about why we behave the way that we do.
And that is great information to have. Thank you for sharing that. And we are about at the top of the hour, so I'm going to wrap up.
Can we go over the poll results before we cut out?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Let's do that, and then we'll go to the second poll. And I'm also going to drop the links in the chat where people can find you on your other podcast and previous RfRx appearances. And yes, I will share the results of the poll, and then we'll do the end poll, and then we'll wrap up. So, real quickly, the poll results from the earlier questions were, here we go, I will share them now, and I will read it as well. The first question was, to what extent was magical thinking a part of your religious practice? And 23% of people said it was a primary focus. 40% of people said a moderate amount. 10% only a little. 13% not at all. And 13% have never been religious or were not sure. Now, I was actually surprised by that. I thought it would be more.
There's a part of me that's wondering the moderate amount of not recognizing magical thinking for what it was in religious structures. Like, I don't know, but it just like my little part of my brain's going like, what is that moderate amount?
Yeah, I wonder if we did a post talk poll if people would
right.
answer the same way.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it's a primary focus of most religious traditions, personally, especially if you count prayer as magical thinking. But so that's an interesting response. Question number 2 was, do you ever engage in magical thinking? 27% of people said yes, often. 47% said I've caught myself doing it before. 10% said never, and 17% are not sure. This would be another one that would be interesting to hear a before and after. Okay, last one was, do you have any rituals involving magical thinking that you regularly practice, such as lucky underwear? 23% said yes, 67% said no, and 10% said I'm not sure. We will do our wrap up real quick. Don't forget to come back next week. We'll be back again, same time, same channel. You can find the recordings online at our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have any questions, comments, or inquiries, you can email us at rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. And don't forget to check out the blog and the podcast. And I'm dropping all those links in the chat. And Rob, do you want to tell people where they can find us on the social medias?
Yeah, we're all over the interwebs. Facebook, of course, which is facebook.com/recoveringfromreligion. We have a support group page on Facebook, which is facebook.com/RFR support groups project. And of course, we're on Twitter, and that's twitter.com/RFRorg. Instagram, which is RFRorg also. And also even the TikTok, which is the @recovering from religion. So we had one person, but not at all. I want to know what religion they're in that has no magical thinking. I really want to know that.
I do too.
If we get to the audio part where you guys can ask questions, I'd love to hear from whoever that is.
Yes, I do as well. This is going to be fun. We might need to start doing this sometimes, having the before and after poll and talking about it in the Hangout. So
it did switch the primary focus from a moderate amount quite a bit. I don't have the other one up, but yeah, that was a drastic switch.
Yeah, it was. And I guess that makes sense because when I was religious, I didn't think that anything we were engaging in was magical. In fact, we would talk all the time about how magic is bad, it's evil, it's sinful, it's not part of what we do here. So it kind of makes sense that people wouldn't think of their religious practice as being magical thinking.
Yeah, I've heard theists, usually when it's callers to Atheist Experience, other shows like that, they get really offended when you relate biblical stories to magic.
Yeah, because in that belief system, magic is bad.